Hi everyone. The title of my talk today is Recruiting Collective Intelligence to Level Art World Stratification, How Virtual Museums Can Impact the Actual Art System. Essentially, the talk is going to speculate on the utility of online collections. Even though online collections have been around since the mid-1990s, as museum technologist David Newberry recently remarked, museums still don't know what to do with them. What I want to propose today is that online collections of art digitizations can do more than simply provide access to images and information about physical collections to an expanded public. These growing and increasingly interconnected collections have the potential to transform the distribution of prestige and success in the actual art system. My hypothesis is that they can serve as a digital infrastructure to recruit collective intelligence on a mass scale so as to generate alternative value for different artworks than the ones celebrated by the system. In doing so, online collections can offset some of the perverse effects of the art world's gatekeeping mechanisms by opening up its access barriers to institutional prestige. Ultimately, my speculation is that online collections can help level the art system's stratification and foster more equality and diversity in the milieu. But doing this isn't as straightforward as it may seem. If you want to level the art world, you can't simply design an open platform devoid of gatekeepers or rely on Altmetrics, that is, on views and likes, to record and tally user preferences. The main problem with these strategies isn't access or findability, as might be assumed. Designing interfaces that enable non-expert publics to discover different artworks is, of course, vital. But if the goal is to ensure more equality and diversity in the art world, then findability is not the main challenge. The main challenge to achieving this goal is the network effects that invariably bias individual judgment. In light of these effects, the answer to the art world stratification is not to relinquish institutional control and simply defer to public taste. The solution that I propose is to involve users in a choice-based task that recruits their sense-making faculty as opposed to their personal taste through a precise curatorial and thus institutional support structure. I want to start by saying a few words about the notion of critical infrastructure from an art world perspective, since this is a milieu that I believe online collections of art digitizations can and should impact. Historically, there has been a long tradition of artists and curators who have used their practice to denounce art institutions' exclusive structures. Until recently, however, most of these efforts took the form of symbolic gestures, for instance, institutional critique. Today, such aesthetics of negation have lost much of their traction on the art system, as illustrated by the title of this ArtNet review of the latest Venice Biennial, which reads, "Venice Biennial artists want to blow up the art system, but for power brokers around town, that system was in full flower." As curator Mick Wilson remarks, if critical practice today is to have any effect on actual conditions, then it requires a shift of negation from a strategic operation in the symbolic register to a strategic operation in the infrastructural register. Likewise, art historian David Joslett asserts against time-honored critical strategies of withdrawal and denunciation that connectivity produces power. He states, "One need not exit the art world or denigrate its capacities. Instead, we must recognize and exploit its potential power in newly creative and progressive ways. Our real work begins after art, in the networks and its formats." If Wilson and Joslett are right, then one of the main objectives of virtual museums should be to provide infrastructure that connects different artists, artworks, and users, and further leverages this connectivity to shift the balance of power in the art world so that this power can be exploited in newly progressive ways. The best prospect for such infrastructure, in my view, can be found in today's growing online collections, which are becoming increasingly interconnected through linked open data projects such as linked art and aggregators like Google Arts and Culture, ArtNet, and Contemporary Art Daily. The challenge now, as I see it, is to design a digital experience capable of effectively recruiting the perspectives of a demographic cross-section of non-expert users on these collections so as to generate alternative value for different artworks than those promoted by the art system, and thus change the very constitution of this system. Digital technology has already proven to offer notable opportunities for arts organizations to reach new and more diverse audiences. In fact, digital-only users are much more likely to come from minority groups than those who engage both online and in person. This indicates that virtual museums have the potential to record and exploit multiple underrepresented perspectives in ways that exceed physical institutions' capabilities and to eventually sustain critical infrastructural operations such as desegregation, power sharing, and institutional reform. Over the past 2 decades, museum computing has increasingly designed tools and applications to support power sharing around digitized collection, for instance through folksonomies and citizen curation. And such tools have effectively deferred part of the institution's power and authority to end users. But while these tools have facilitated discovery and altered museum taxonomies, they have had very little effect on the actual value of artworks, leaving the art system's unfair distribution of prestige intact. So why is the distribution of value and prestige in the art world so asymmetric? Why is it that a handful of artists make millions while most live under the poverty line? It is certainly not because this handful of high-profile artists are geniuses or have exceptional talent. On the contrary, it is precisely because there are no objective criteria to assess the quality of any artwork or the performance of its maker. As network scientist Albert Laszlo Barabasi observes, in fields with few objective criteria to gauge performance, quality is determined by the network. The contemporary art world is an extreme case. Art's value is entirely determined by the network of art experts, so critics, curators, art historians, dealers, collectors, etc. Recognition of an artwork's quality actually depends on variables that are external to the work itself, for instance, the exhibition venue where it is shown. A large network science study from 2018 proved this by reconstructing the careers of nearly 500,000 contemporary artists based on exhibition data, auction sales, and primary market quotes between 1980 and 2016. What the study found is that prestige in the art world is concentrated among a small number of select artists moving across an exclusive cluster of prominent art institutions mainly located in Europe and North America that is isolated from the multitude of dense regional communities of art institutions throughout the world. The study showed that exhibiting early on in an elite institution, an artist's first 5 shows, is the best predictor of an artist's success across a variety of measures. Whereas these artists go on to show at high prestige institutions throughout their career, the success of artists starting at the periphery is largely local and incremental. What this means is that through a lock-in effect, the art world network determines artists' prestige, commercial success, and career longevity. But there is some cause for optimism. While artistic careers are characterized by strong path dependence, artists who exhibit at institutions of widely varying location and reputation, instead of always showing at the same galleries, can gain access to the center of the art world and thus a ticket to future prestige. So essentially, success in the contemporary art world really depends on linking up with the right connectors in the network. This suggests that curators, critics, and gallerists' capacity to discover the work of new artists and artists' capacity to make their work known early on to the right gatekeepers is largely responsible for the art world's stratified institutional prestige. So while art world networks function like a pyramid scheme, constantly driving up the price of high reputation artists' works, It is not closed. Its access barriers are not fixed based on geographical origin, even though the center is largely isolated from regional communities. What this suggests is that unlike canonical art history, the contemporary art world's endorsement of certain artistic practices over others is not inherently discriminatory, even while it clearly privileges artists from the West. Rather, it is artists' circumstantial lack of access to elite gatekeepers and vice versa that is really driving discrimination in the system. To sum up, the art world's stratification is largely due to the milieu's gatekeeping mechanisms. Making it as an artist really depends on the judgment of a small number of art world professionals who do not possess unlimited capacity for discovery. The obvious solution to this problem is to multiply eyeballs to augment discovery and capture other perspectives to diversify and counterbalance the judgment of experts in the attribution of value. Simply put, this entails recruiting collective intelligence by means of digital technology. To do this, it would seem as though all you need is to create open platforms devoid of gatekeepers and use an endorsement feature such as a like button to track public preferences. Unsurprisingly, mobile museum apps and online collections are increasingly integrating endorsement features similar to the ones found on social media platforms to record the public's appraisal of content. For instance, the Mona Museum's in-gallery mobile app, the O, includes a love-hate function that enables visitors to register their feeling about the artworks on display. In terms of online collections, Europeana, Smartify, and Rig Studio all encourage users to like content by clicking on a heart icon. In fact, Rig Studio clearly displays the number of likes associated with each artwork, thus generating a certain amount of user influence on subsequent engagement through social feedback. One issue that immediately arises with endorsement features is that they typically require a login wall, which tends to stop users in their tracks, so you don't necessarily get adequate and representative public participation. For instance, only 3% of Europeana's online traffic consists of registered users who can actually like content. But this figure is constantly growing, and given the public buy-in that virtual museums have enjoyed since the pandemic, if concerted efforts are made to reach diverse communities, it may only be a matter of time before this issue is resolved. I think that the real problem lies elsewhere. What fully open and purportedly democratic spaces devoid of gatekeeping mechanisms essentially do is that they turn every user into a node in the network. But what happens in practice when you multiply the number of connectors along the social network that lead back to the center is that you often end up reproducing and even amplifying the network's prejudicial effects rather than surpassing them. While I don't have time to get into it here, this phenomenon can be observed, for instance, in the distribution of sales on some popular NFT platforms like Nifty, which largely replicate the disparities of the physical art market. In sum, turning every user into a citizen critic or curator is not the solution, at least not without the proper institutional support system in place. One of the main reasons for this counterintuitive observation is that the process of liking art, that is, endorsing a work based on a feeling, is susceptible to various domains of influence that tend to either sustain existing asymmetries or create new ones. So if the objective is to foster more equality and diversity in the art system, then the main problem with Altmetrics as an alternative form of public endorsement to expert connoisseurship is not online access barriers, nor insufficient participation. Multiplying eyeballs, facilitating discovery, and promoting public choices are all essential. But these initiatives cannot transform the system if the individual judgment being captured is biased by network effects driving inequality. Public endorsement, recorded through Altmetrics, might indeed displace the center to some degree, but it cannot level the playing field. When in-gallery visitors and online users like a work, It is widely assumed that this endorsement signifies that the work holds meaning for that person in light of their particular experiences, memories, knowledge, viewpoint, cultural frame of reference, etc. Yet what this common assumption overlooks is the fact that the judgment involved in liking a singular artwork is susceptible to different spheres of influence. To start with, the public's perception of art is always affected by the invisible networks of art world experts that regulate prestige and value. These networks do not only determine which works hang on museum walls, they even command which works we line to see. Their influence on the public is not limited to physical exhibitions. Patterns of casual engagement with online collections have shown that users largely gravitate towards museum highlights handpicked by experts. Moreover, beyond the influence of these invisible art world networks, there are other powerful domains of influence affecting public taste, including the media and entertainment industry. Still, influence is not just top-down. It can also come from the bottom up, which is why Altmetrics first seems like the right solution. Empirical studies have shown that social feedback has a strong impact on artistic appreciation. Moreover, social influence has also been shown to significantly affect diverse reward systems, including financial gain, endorsement, social status, and social support on different online crowdsourcing platforms. And this is precisely why exploiting altmetrics through virtual museums to offset expert taste first seems like the logical move. If knowledge of previous participants' choices impacts subsequent users' judgment, then the rationale is that this alternative cumulative value can potentially give artworks that have been overlooked by experts and power brokers a fighting chance to rise to the top. Sounds great in theory, but when it comes to art, social feedback is actually a catch-22, precisely because there are no objective criteria to assess the value of art. So this leads to two major problems associated with social influence: runaway inequality and artificial manipulation. Without objective criteria, aesthetic judgment is highly vulnerable to the collective phenomenon of preferential attachment, which can kickstart runaway inequality. Preferential attachment is our innate human tendency to endorse superstars rather than underdogs, which results in success breeds success effects, meaning that popular candidates become more popular and unpopular candidates become less popular. And the stronger the social influence, the more the outcomes become unequal. Moreover, these inequalities persist over time. The other major problem of relying on altmetrics to level the art system is that social influence can easily be manipulated. Stakeholders who have a vested interest in a particular candidate's success can easily tamper with social feedback for their own gain. Since it is well known that elite galleries manipulate the art market, chances are that they would equally intervene in alternative value systems to maintain or boost the prestige and value of their represented artists' works, and thus further aggravate inequalities in the system. In sum, relying on user preferences to level stratification in the art world is more likely to kickstart runaway inequality through an amplification effect than to create more parity and diversity in the system. So if you can't rely on open platforms free of gatekeepers and use endorsement features to capture public taste in order to offset the unjust distribution of prestige in the art system, what can you do to make the art world more equal and diverse? In my view, this still entails recruiting collective intelligence, only in a different way. Instead of inciting users to judge singular artworks based on personal preference, I believe that the solution is to create a user experience that will lead users to judge the semantic connections between different artworks instead, thereby exercising their personal sense-making faculty, which is far less susceptible to outside influence. Practically speaking, I think that this could be done through a pathfinding navigational tool for online collections, making users choose from among pre-curated sets of diverse but interrelated artworks at different nodes along the path. As art critic John Berger famously remarked 50 years ago regarding art reproductions, the meaning of an image is changed according to what one sees immediately beside it or what comes immediately after it. Such authority as it retains is distributed over the whole context in which it appears. The implication of Berger's observation for the present claim is the following. If users are presented with a pre-curated set of diverse artworks that all relate to an initial work but specify different meanings, then by selecting one work among the group, users will be opting for a particular interpretation of each work, presumably the one that most closely aligns with their own worldview, that is, their own personal hierarchy of meanings and values. And this process could theoretically be repeated with a growing selection of artworks among a path to create a coherent and personally meaningful constellation of artworks. The key point is that such personally meaningful constellations would establish diverse interpretive contexts for the works, radically differing from the network context through which artworks currently gain value in the system in light of their performance. In other words, where the works are shown, who represents the artist, who owns the works, etc. Thus, this proposal involves turning users into citizen meta-curators, as opposed to citizen curators. Indeed, this choice-based task is very different from the curatorial functions that today's advanced collection interfaces currently offer to the public. These functions typically enable users to select artworks from the collection and curate their own personal online galleries. While these individually curated galleries typically reveal personal preferences and interests, they do not speak to users' unique worldview. The reason being that when users select artworks from among large sets, they tend to either pick their favorites, subject to various domains of influence, or to pick artworks that correspond to a particular thematic interest. Naturally, there is nothing wrong with these tendencies if the goal is to create a collection of stuff that one likes, or to visually research a particular idea or motif. But if the aim is to level the art system, then collective intelligence should be channeled in such a way as to invest artworks with personal value, and this can only be done by means of a different selection process. Users should be compelled to pick artworks because they fit with their unique worldview, not because they look pretty or have a certain cool factor, regardless of whether or not they actually prefer these works. To conclude, I believe that redressing art world stratification could partly be achieved through the implementation of a choice-based pathfinding tool for online collections, drawing on complex in-gallery curatorial approaches to incite users to pick out personally meaningful connections as opposed to singular artworks. With enough diverse public participation, I speculate that such a tool could generate data capable of offsetting the primacy of expert taste so as to truly foster more equality and diversity in the art system. Thank you.